My name is James Hill. I'm known as Jim, and J-I-M is how you spell that, and H-I-L-L is the last name.
Great.
And you'll ask him for eyeline?
Yeah, and then we'll have you keep an eye on me
Yeah.
again. I just want to remind you of that. Where did you live during the 1964 flood?
In 1964, I was living in McKinleyville on Sutter Road, and I had lived there for probably about 4 years at that time.
And how old were you during the 1964 flood?
I had to do the math, but it's my age was 31.
And what were you doing for a living during the flood?
I was working for Georgia Pacific in the Samoa plant, and I was operating a big overhead bridge crane.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That means the bridge crane means there were two raised tracks 40 feet in the air and 110 feet apart with a bridge across, and with the bridge there's a big winch and also an operator car hung underneath the bridge so that I could pick up loads down underneath I had all the controls right there in that car that was hung underneath. I was up in the air all the time.
Well, you were up in the air a lot because you were up in the air because you were a pilot too.
That's right.
Yeah,
Height didn't bother me that much.
Tell me about being a pilot during that era.
I learned how to fly in 1958, and I took my training from a guy named Al Camilli at the Samoa airport. He was a grizzled old guy, but he was really good on piloting. And I got a plane in 1959, and then I got my pilot's license shortly after that, through a lot of training and a lot of tests and whatnot, and flew extensively over the local area.
What sort of a plane did you have?
Cessna 140, great little plane.
Men and their planes, boy, you can tell that there's a relationship there.
Absolutely, if it worked for me.
So during the 1964 flood, it was raining for a long time. And at what point did you know that this was more than just a regular rainstorm?
Well, when the storm started, it just looked like another flood. We always had one every year. But as it progressed, the water just kept coming down and the wind kept whipping and blowing and everything. And so finally, over the news one night, I heard that they'd lost a Coast Guard helicopter, and that was just at the onset of the storm, and all people aboard, and they didn't find it for quite a while. And so the next few days, I can't give you the days or dates, but all of a sudden the flood reports started coming in from the rivers and whatnot, and the weatherman said it didn't look like it was going to stop. So then people started to get apprehensive. And at that time I figured, well, okay, I lost my job temporarily because of the damages done to the company's holdings in the area. So I was out of work, so to speak. So one day I went into Eureka to do some things. I still had gas in the car, and I was driving around on the street and listening to the radio, and a thing came on the radio that they were looking for volunteers to be navigators and spotters for the Army helicopters that were coming into Ronerville. And I thought, well, I don't have anything else to do. So I went to they said report to the sheriff's office and for volunteers. And so I went to the sheriff's office. They processed me fairly rapidly too, checked my pilot's license and oral examination and whatnot, so on and so forth. So I was dispatched to Ronerville from there. And when I got to Fortuna, well, first of all, when I was going by the river, I thought, my God, that thing is really big, and I got to Fortuna, and there was a guard there that wouldn't let anybody in Fortuna without official business. But I told him where I was going, and he let me through. And so I proceeded to Ronerville and checked in, and there was an Army colonel in charge there. and his squadron of helicopters sitting out there. And so I checked in with him, and he said, well, fine, glad to have you. He gave me a seat in the ready room, and he said, just wait here. So I did. And time went by, and finally he picked me to go with one of the guys. And the helicopters were two-seaters, and I don't know whether they were Bells or Sikorskis or whatever it was, but I couldn't tell. No helicopter experience. And so anyway, we took off. It was storming, by the way, and the colonel wanted us to go up the river, check out Stafford and the area and see if there's anybody up there in big trouble. And but we only got part way up the river, and it just got too bad. So he had it was an Army captain that was piloting the helicopter, and so he aborted. We went back and landed, and I went back to the ready room again. And I might mention that all the pilots there were volunteers, and most of them were Army. There was one guy that was the chief test pilot for Hiller Aircraft. Larry Lape was his name, and I had an experience with him later on. And so anyway, I sat there a while longer, and then another Army captain came and got me and said, we're going to McKinley Bill to get some parts for an aircraft and bring them back. We got one that's not working. So anyway, we took off and went north, and I said the easy way will just follow 101. That's the easiest way to do it, visual. Well, we got stormed out. A squall hit us, and he aborted and went back. But I didn't think it was that bad, but he thought it was, and he was the pilot, so we went back, and that gave me 2 zeros for my 2 first missions. So anyway, so that was getting towards the end of the day, so I went home after that. I mean, they just laid everybody off because it was getting dark, and they don't fly in the dark. So I went home, came back the next morning, and checked in, and the colonel was there, and I forgot to tell you, he was a very emphatic man. He really laid it on you. And my Army experience said, if you get a direct order from a colonel, you do it, So anyway, this time he said he'll go back with Larry Lape and go back and get those parts at Arcata Airport. I said, okay, yes sir, we'll do it, I guarantee it. So anyway, we took off, and it was getting a little bit of hazy fog around the airport at that time. So I told Larry, I said, we'll go down to the ocean, and then we'll go up the coast, and then we'll go up the hill up to the airport there, because that's be the best way. Because we don't want to, with a hazy fog, we don't want to perhaps encounter some obstacles flying low over populated areas. So we did. We took off and slid down onto the river and headed out towards the coast. And it started to get foggier. And so Larry was flying. I gave him the course. I showed him the map. I gave him the course and everything. And so as we progressed, it kept getting foggier and foggier all the time. So Larry kept moving down lower, and pretty soon we were down on the water. And I had calculated the time of arrival at the ocean, and not having any helicopter experience, I didn't realize the engine sounded the same, but we were only doing like 20 knots at the time, and you can't fly a regular airplane at 20 knots, and that's what I'm used to. But anyway, so we didn't get to the ocean the time that I projected, but I realized that what happened, and I gave him a new time. And when we got to the ocean, finally, I mean, we were penetrating into this dense wall of fog by that time. It was bad. It was what I call the legendary Humboldt County fog, and so pretty soon we couldn't see anything except the water below us and a little bit ahead of us. And So we didn't want to abort then, so we kept going. And I said, the only way we're ever going to tell if it's the ocean or not is the waves, you know. And sure enough, pretty soon the water started going up and down, up and down. So that was, but the water was the same color. I didn't mention it was a really bad brown, and it was right on out into the ocean. So we continued on out into the ocean. I told Larry we'd go out a ways, turn north, and then skirt the coast. And when we got past Table Bluff, where I thought, you know, we didn't have any visual things to see, I had him turn back towards the coast again and give him a new compass heading. And so then pretty soon we were on the surf line north of Table Bluff. And so I said, well, just settle down. We were almost on it anyway. Settle down as low as you can go, because we couldn't see. And we could see the surf below us. And we continued on up to follow the call it the South Spit, up to the South Jetty. And I told him, when we get to the South Jetty, I said, be very careful, because it juts up and whatnot. So we were going very slow. And I said, now turn, and I gave him a course to go across the entrance to the bay. And so we crept across there, and I said, be very, very careful on the other side, because the Coast Guard has a navigation device that sticks up. And so we did, and out of the fog, there it is, right in front of us. So anyway, and he never challenged, never said a word or anything like that. He just did what I told him. He was a test pilot. So we skirted around that thing and moved over onto the Samoa beach, and over the North Jetty, and landed on the Samoa beach. And then he decided to land on the beach because he wanted to talk to the airport and let them know what our intentions were. So he did, and they came back at him and they said, well, the airport is totally socked in. So they said, but if you think you can get in, go ahead. So we did, and we continued up the coast. And I told, while I was there though, the beach was just littered with debris. It was a one big mess. I mean, propane tanks, pieces of houses, logs, lumber, a few kids' toys, you know, you name it. And so anyway, we went on up the coast, and I told Larry, I said, when we get to Clam Beach intersection, I said, that'll be our reference point. And so we got up there, and we were still right down on the surf. And we got up there, I said, now do a 180, that's a complete turnaround, and go back. And that was where I had to make a big estimate, because the airport elevation is 200 feet. And we're down, and I could see under the fog over across the dunes there, but it was jammed up against the bank. The cliff was on the top. So I said, Larry, I said, I figured out the timing that we flew back in reverse, and I said, okay, stop. See that bank over there underneath the fog? And he said, yeah. And I said, just go over there and ease up against that bank and get as close as you can and still be safe, and start climbing that bank. And he didn't know what was up in that fog up at the top, but he did. And we went up the bank very, very slowly, and the leaves were flying, and the fog was swirling and everything, you know, and we got up to the top of the bank. There was a little wooden fence, and over the fence, there was the lights on the end of the runway. It was good.
It's a good thing he was a test pilot, because he
Yeah, no
followed your
kidding.
orders, you know.
Yeah, and when we got over the fence, I said, okay, Larry, you know what that is. So he got over the fence and down on the blacktop on the end of the runway. And so I said, well, just start down the runway. And we still couldn't see anything. It was still really bad fog. And so we eased down the runway about 3 feet off the ground. And then I told him, well, here's a taxiway here. I said, take the taxiway. And we went over on the taxiway, and I said, okay, now we're going to go a ways here, and then you'll have a left turn. We'll turn left. And I said, then we'll turn right. Be prepared to turn right. And so we turned right, and we're just going into this wall of fog, you know. And I said, the tower ought to be right there. And I held my hand up, and it came out of the fog. So he was happy. He was done, but he never ever said a word. You know, a negative word. He asked me questions and things like that. But when we got there and we were ready to set down onto the blacktop, in fact we did. We sat down on the blacktop, and a Navy officer ran out, and he wanted to know where the hole was, how we got in. And Larry looked at him and said, no. He said, no hole. You're not going to go out that way. So it was interesting. And then the Navy fellow, actually was an officer that came out then, and he had his subordinate put us over in a place to park the helicopter, and come to find out there's a whole bunch of big Navy helicopters there ready to go, but couldn't. So, and we didn't go back either. So, after that, he called the base and told them that we wouldn't be coming back that night. And anyway, we hitched a ride into Eureka, and there was an assembly point for a lot of the volunteer pilots and whatnot at the Fireside Motel. And so we went in there and had a beer, you know, and kind of unwound. And then I hitched a ride back to McKinley Bill to go home that night, and found out that there was a message for me on the phone that I had to go back to work the next day. So that was my last experience in the '64 flood in the flight line.
So you went back to work in the logging industry?
Yes, yes. I went back to work. We were actually getting out with the big crane. We were getting out equipment to loan to other companies like Pacific Lumber to try and put their operation back together. But it was. I often thought, though, that Larry had to go back and face the colonel. I didn't.
Yeah, I was wondering what that colonel thought about
Yeah, I was asked that question too, and I never did find out, but I'm sure he was not happy.
They must have been just shocked that you arrived there out of this fog.
Yeah, well, they were. The fact is, they were very, very happy that we got in somehow and they could get out, but they found out, no, that wasn't gonna happen. But Larry did when we landed, though. He landed and shut the engine off and shook hands.
Yeah. How I'm wondering, like, how, you know, I'm thinking in the helicopter it's really loud.
Very loud.
How did you communicate with each other?
In that, we just yelled at each other. Yeah. And by the way, those helicopters were brand new, and I was told that they were almost on the docks, ready to go to Vietnam. But they were commandeered. So nothing like a brand new helicopter. I mean, when I got on it, they had the plastic seat that had never been sit in. You know? So it was. They were very dependable.
Sounds like it. Now, the timber companies, you know, we've heard lots of stories about these log decks breaking loose and all this timber going out to the ocean. It sounds like you saw that down on the beach when you guys flew down there.
I saw some of that on the beach. I saw some of it in the river. The timber that we were discussing, and lumber and logs, and they were just running amok everywhere. I didn't see any dead cattle, but I understand there was a lot of dead cattle too, because we went over the farms that were inundated there, the ranches. Yeah. But it was just amazing, all the debris that was on the beach. And somewhere along the line, there's a picture, and it may have been seen by lots of you, but when after the flood, the cleanup of the beach, they set everything on fire, and it was monumental. A lot of debris there to burn up, but it's all gone now.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of that where they made like basically like teepees of the debris and just lit
Yeah.
the whole. They say it was like really black.
Yeah, there was an aerial picture that showed from the sky, the fires that were burning on the beaches there. And I understood that, I don't know, I'm going to say 1,100 cattle were buried over on the South Spit in the sand over there that died in that.
Yeah.
I don't know what, my numbers are not, they're pretty ragged, but.
No, we heard Centerville Beach.
Oh, is it Centerville?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's where several people told us.
Oh, well, that could be true.
And then, so let's see, other questions. Do you guys have any other questions?
You know when that helicopter went down in McCann?
Yeah.
It sounds like Larry was the guy that came over the ridge to find that pilot.
He may have.
They described the guy that came over the ridge to get the pilot to survive that crash.
Okay.
And it said he was a test pilot.
Yeah.
That's got to be him.
Yeah.
That's got to be, I didn't even know that. Yeah. I'll be darned. Well, he was good. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was right there.
Yeah.
That's quite a story, the McCann story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bet it was. I'll have to watch the movie.
Yeah.
No, Larry, when he shut the engine off and said, and shook hands, he said, thanks.
Well, you must have felt a lot of responsibility being the one guiding him in through that fog. That must have been pretty harrowing for you,
There's
too.
a little bit of white knuckles.
I think so.
I'm glad my estimate was correct.
Yeah. Let's see. How about other experiences? Like you'd said that the stores were pretty well wiped out. Could you describe going into the grocery stores or trying to find food during that time?
I think as far as shortage of food, I had the typical experience of anybody that went into a grocery store, and all of a sudden, it's something you're not used to, is to see empty shelves. During that time, after the weather laid down, there was still a lot of activity at the local airport, and it was said that at one time McKinley Bill was, for an airport that size, it was the busiest in the world. And one of the grocery stores, and this is just hearsay, that they brought in some air freight for groceries. And in those days, money was worth a lot, and it cost them $10,000. So they found that wasn't very profitable.
It's not like now where we buy our food from South America in the wintertime, you know.
Exactly, yeah. Cuba, or not Cuba, but Chile and around in there.
Yeah.
Did you ever see the Bennington off the coast?
The what?
The Bennington?
I didn't even mention that. Yeah, a friend of mine had a house over in Eureka, up by Alice Murray School, kind of on the hill there. You could see the Bennington right out the window.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where the Navy helicopters came from the Bennington.
There were 40 on there.
Yeah,
Bennington.
yeah. As you're probably all aware, there was Army, Navy, and Marines here with their helicopters here. Yeah. So it was a lot of people were very thankful to have them here too, because and a lot of people were on dry land just watching the news, and of course it was on CBS News in the evening.
Now, did you have any problems up in McKinleyville where you lived? Was where your home was pretty
Didn't have a bit of problem. McKinleyville is up on that high ground there. But I didn't mention too, though, that when I went to work that morning, I could look out over the. I was going down Bella Vista Hill, and I could look out over the Mad River Flat, and that Mad River had busted out of its banks and was flowing just north of, across the flat there, just north of Giantilli Lane. And I could see that it was bad, and I wasn't going to get to work that way, so I went around, and on 299, I went North Bank Road, 299, and was set to go across out Samoa Boulevard in Arcata, and I got just outside of town, and of course there was water coming right around behind Arcata. Mad River was coming around, and it covered that road for about a mile. So that, and it was just like a spillway coming through there. So I thought, well, that's another option. I can't go to work that way. So I went around and went to Eureka and took the ferry. And I was able to get across the bay that way. And I got there and just stayed there a little while, and they told me to go home. So,
that's funny, because I was going to say, now was the Samoa Bridge in,
No,
the bridge wasn't
not
in yet.
until the
So I was like,
70s.
and then you said ferry, and I'm like, oh man, I wouldn't have even thought of that.
yeah, that was the accepted way for a long time, from Eureka to Samoa. Yeah.
Now, we talked a little bit before we got started about Eureka, or really Humboldt County and probably Del Norte County as well, being cut off during this time. There really wasn't any way to get here.
No, they finally later the Corps of Engineers, I think it was, put a temporary. Well, they had a ferry up there for a while, I think. But I never really got into that. But a lot of places they had temporary bridges or ferries or whatever just to get people in and out. But I didn't get into that, like I say.
Well, we're going to have to go up and take a look at Blue Slide Road, because that is apparently the way that a lot of the 18-wheelers were coming in Blue Slide Road, which is hard to imagine.
Yeah. I heard about it. I don't know whether I've ever been up it myself, but I heard a lot about it then. And a lot of the private pilots, I never mentioned that during this time, my plane was broke down. It was under maintenance, so I couldn't fly myself during that. But a lot of guys were flying and landing on the streets or roads and whatnot like that to help out. But mine was in the big hangar at Arcata, and that was it.
Well, those were great stories. Any other questions you guys think I should ask?
Well, Jimmy, you can keep looking at Jennifer when
Yeah.
you answer.
Okay.
But were you happy to go back to work, or were you wishing you had a few more
I was kind of torn between, because I thought work is kind of humdrum. But, a young guy and a new experience like that, I was 31, but I was still young as far as that goes. So I would have liked to have gone back the next day, really. I knew there was a lot more to do out there and some good people to do it with, but I went to work.
And
Sounds like they could have used you.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we had talked about a little bit is about how people here in Humboldt County, because they're people who work with their hands, and are used to problem solving, probably fare better than people might have like in a big city when you think of some of these disasters that happen there. What do you think about that?
I think the people that were impacted by that flood had a lot of fiber, and you wouldn't find that in people from a big city, because they, the 9-to-5ers driving down Market Street wouldn't have any idea what to do. I don't think so.
We think you're right.